Any Auden super fans around the table?
I don't know. I mean, not that I've studied him, but I just made me cry when I read the language. When I read him.
Fantastic. Why?
Um,
I mean, you don't have to go to the completely personal, but what is it about the language that maybe strikes you as being characteristic of Auden or in these poems?
He uses really recognizable words in surprising ways.
Yeah.
What just there was one, the unmentionable odor of death.
Right.
They just grab emotionally, I think.
Fair. So Auden is known in part for these kinds of moves, for his sort of. You can see there's a tiny bit of a biographical sketch at the end of September 1st, 1939. His unsurpassed technical virtuosity. Right. He was born in York, England, educated in Oxford. By 1930, he was publishing poetry and was already sort of widely regarded as one of the important voices of his generation. When the Spanish Civil War broke out, he decided to serve. He went over with a number of other young men from kind of his social class, attempted to get a job driving an ambulance, but he was pretty good with words. So they put him in an office writing propaganda. He was not happy with that and left after a few weeks. But the experience sort of left him a little jaded and left him kind of questioning what he thought were some very, very clear-cut reasons for the war. And some of those complications, I think, are still felt in the poetry from his early World War II years, like the two pieces we read. He came to the United States, he came to New York in January of 1939. And he would stay here, though kind of bouncing back to Europe and then eventually between Vienna and New York, but with a toehold in New York for the rest of his life. He died in 1973. When the war broke out, he volunteered to go back to the UK, though he was sort of already on the path to becoming an American citizen. They told him to stay in the United States, in part because they were not interested in sort of bringing back people that they couldn't immediately put into the draft. And Auden, when he became an American, was ultimately rejected by his local draft board. So he didn't serve during the war, but near the war's end, he was sent to Germany, where he participated in the strategic bombing survey. Near the end of the war, there was an interest in trying to determine how successful the Allied strategic bombing campaign had been in breaking German morale, which is the sort of, euphemism for the massive damage inflicted on the entire population during the air war. It was an experience that moved him deeply. And much of his poetry sort of after World War II still kind of bears the effects of studying these images of destruction so intently to try to determine whether or not it was able to do something abstract like break morale, whatever that might mean, through death and destruction. So the experience affected him, again, both personally and professionally. The pair of poems today that I want to talk about, both written in 1939. One, of course, the date is very specific. We'll get to that. But I wanted to start first with this Refugee Blues, which is written a little earlier. And it's a shorter poem and maybe easier to talk about in its entirety. What do you make of this poem? What do you make of its title? What's it doing? What are the Refugee Blues? Yeah. All right. Great. So on the one hand, sadness. There's something that the poem's title is cueing us to one of its themes, plight of refugees, and it's not it's not gumdrops and roses. It's sad. It's supposed to be, and that's what. But how else is blues, or do the blues show up in this poem?
I think the structure of it mimics the music blues, so it mimics the same structure that those songs usually have.
Interesting. So there's something that feels kind of musical about the structure. What makes it musical about the structure of the poem? I think you're right, by the way.
The rhymes, like the rhymes and some parts. Like in the repetition, I would not go there now. My dear would not go there now. Like the repetition on, that's something you usually find in variations from songs, especially with blues.
All right, absolutely. So there's something. There's a musical quality to this lyric poem as well, right? As being a poem about an aspect of the refugee experience. Cool. Say the city has 10 million souls. Some are living in mansions, some are living in holes. Yet there's no place for us, my dear. There's no place for us. Who's us? Is that antecedent of us?
I would say German Jews.
Okay.
Specifically, or Jews in Europe.
All right. So a particular kind of refugee comes to mind. What brings German Jews to mind?
Well, the latter part of the poem specifically mentions it. Although in some ways it's it can be applied to all refugees who are facing.
Right. Okay. So this is so good. So a question might be, when you first read it, does your mind go specifically to the plight of German Jews, to refugees in general? Because we're going to come to that stanza in a minute.
Originally I thought it was just general, but then as I read the poem, it's a specific case of maybe a more general condition.
Okay. Yeah. No. I think that's a good, and it's an important, because what we're going to talk about as a refugee community, what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah, and us, my dear, sounds like two people.
Yeah. Oh, right. So two people. So the speaker and
two people who don't fit in with these 10 million in this city for some reason.
Yeah. What's the effect of that? Like I like that reading. If there's just two, what does that do for our thinking about this poem?
Following the lines he was mentioning, I read about his life a little bit.
Cool.
Yesterday, and I think he's gay.
Mm-hmm.
He was gay. Actually, he references in September 1st, he references 52nd Street. There was a bar there named the Dizzy Club. I remember research about it. It was a gay bar back then, and he might be talking about his couple at the time. Because he actually, when he came to New York, he found somebody who he ended up being with here in New York. So he could be referencing.
Okay, so here, in a moment where New York is filling with refugees, in the way that we might initially think of them, coming from Europe, coming to escape the war, you hear also maybe an echo that there's a gesture toward a different kind of isolation or refugee here in the city.
Also, let's remember that the Germans also, it wasn't only Jews, it was also homosexuals. They were prosecuted, so that's a great example. That's why he said we are in German Jews, but implying the fact they were being prosecuted for something else.
Okay.
In this case, for sexuality.
Good. All right. So even though Auden is English and becoming an American citizen, these other identities might feel kind of or create other affinities at this moment in the poem. Yeah. Interesting. I like this. Yeah. Let's keep going.
Alicia Keys' song "Empire State of Mind," she mentions 8 million souls.
Right.
Same thing, but 8.
Right.
A century later.
No. That's good. I think Alicia Keys alludes to the naked city. Right. There are 8 million stories in the naked city, with a fantastic post-war police procedural. If you're ever sort of shot on location or whatever, it's 1940, Dasein or something. I don't, film people, help me out. Sorry. Right. I don't want to. Surprise! A quiz. No. Right. Okay. Yeah. So say the city has 10 million souls, right? But it's certainly evocative of New York. New York's swelling. Its population is swelling, right? In the pre-war years. I want to return though to this comment about maybe all of a sudden this massive refugee population being just two people in the poem, whether they're lovers, right? Whether it's whatever their relationship might be, friends, or they were just roommates. Whatever it is, the condition might be. The idea that now out of this whole population, it's just two people. What can you do? Yeah.
Parent and child, right? Because my dear is kind of,
dear.
and I think it makes the poem more heartbreaking in a way because the person can not only think about themselves, they have to think about this other person
Okay.
who maybe can't understand, this chaos that they're in.
Okay. Yeah. All right. I like this. I like that too. This kind of the speaker explaining the situation or trying to. Yeah.
I think with what everyone interprets it as, it makes it a bit more personal. If you are putting in your mind, is this a mass of people? Is this a lover? Is this a roommate? Is this a kid? And I think that's what makes it, more personable to you. What's that first thought that you have reading through this, or when you think of a refugee, if that is a young child or spouse or something. So I think that just makes a better connection towards the audience, not know indefinite who he's talking about.
Fantastic. The word "us" is doing just what you're describing, right? When if I say "we," I mean I'm including myself in that. Yeah. So, and you.
Two people sort of asks us to focus on the common humanity that maybe everyone can relate and see within those two people, connect.
Right. Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, I find useful the suggestions of what is the ask from what people were saying, because then as I reread it with that in that context, from the very beginning, from the title of the song, that is like the lyrics of a song in some way, like a pop song, that kind of effect that it can have on me.
Yeah.
So then the ask becomes an invitation from the writer for me to join as well. And in a way, then he then begins to challenge me morally, because then somehow now I am with him, so now there's the moral challenge of the refugee status.
Right.
Either because when I'm reading it, I'm not a refugee myself, but somehow I join their rank. And so now I have that sense of that even now that I'm not a refugee, I've been one in the reading, and so that then I'm morally challenged in both ways as the recipient of the political mass oppression if I'm a refugee, as well as the non-refugee and what do I do.
Inspiring a kind of empathy, maybe as a reader for the through his focus. I like that very well. What can we make of this one stanza that jumped out at me that I found jarring? Near the penultimate stanza on the first page here, it came to a public meeting. The speaker got up and said, "If we let them in, they will steal our daily bread." He was talking of you and me, my dear. He was talking of you and me.
I think he's implicating that countries receiving refugees, their attitudes, not only the Germans who were pushing them out. Right? So again, I think it kind of involves you in the poem more, because you're, and he even goes on, I think, in that he says, the birds in the trees had no politicians, and saying they weren't the human race. It's a very dark line. It's like, we're all implicated in a way in this.
Right.
We're all refugees.
Yes.
It's like the you, it's like us, like we are the refugee in this.
Right.
And he's calling on us to take on that responsibility or that role.
Right. And to recognize that perhaps the others in this public meeting who are not refugees, right, we are implicated in that too, perhaps in a way, right, and have a responsibility, the poem suggesting, to care, a duty to care for the refugees that are arriving. Yeah.
Something that it first struck me as something I could read in the paper every day or listen to every day. If we let them in, they'll steal our daily bread. But also, our daily bread is exact words of a Christian prayer in English. And so I think embedded in that line is this kind of Christian righteousness in a way, or
Self-righteousness, yeah.
or talking to a Christian saying, look, this is in your prayers and you're using it against these refugees.
Right.
There's a lot going on.
Which is like an interesting play on just Christianity claiming to, be very inclusive and welcoming refugees, but at the same time, you're seeing that wording. To me, that called out to me as a targeting Christian also, like just kind of calling them out for not being welcoming.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so and if we could, maybe a charitable or softening that reading too is just to sort of to remind us that this is that there's a duty to charity, perhaps associated with adherence to the faith, and that this is being misused. We should recognize it as being misused. Yeah.
To do something that's contrary to what the language is meant.
Fantastic. Right. Yeah. So critical of hypocrisy and invoking a duty to care that's associated with religious belief. Great. Yeah. I want to. Yeah.
So I agree with the comment about the use of language and religion, but I also took it as like an anti-socialist comment, because when I read that, I thought the person in the meeting saying, if you let them in, let's go out daily bread. Well, who's giving you your daily bread? Must be coming from somewhere that's going to decide to give it to these refugees instead.
Yeah.
That must be some sort of government bread, some sort of socialist system bread. When at the time in America, after the war especially, it was incredibly anti-socialist, pro-capitalist. So who are these people that are earning their own bread, suddenly fearing it's going to be given?
After the war, right? Yeah. So, but by 1939, we're just sort of after. We haven't, the war is just starting. This is after the Depression, maybe. So maybe it's also kind of looking to that, backward in that bit. I like that. I also think daily, though, I feel like that's taking it. But your comment about socialism and Auden. I mean, Auden develops a sort of, he leaves for Spain, committed communist, and his political position becomes a little more complicated because of what he experiences during the war, there in part. So sure, I think you could find in that a critique of that kind of welfare state, perhaps too, if that's what where he's going. The religious connotation, I think hits me hard. Well, there's much more we could do on this. I want to talk about September 1st, 1939, because I have a huge stack of other things we need to get to today. This was much longer. First, what's significant about September 1st, 1939?
It was speech after the cave in the Reichstag, before invading Poland. That's when he makes the accusations that Poland soldiers fire against German forces in the border, which is a lie, obviously. And after that was the justification to make Poland the beginning of World War II.
Okay, all right. So an important date marking the beginning of World War II with Hitler's invasion in Poland. This poem is Auden's reaction to it, right? This is a sort of moment where he recognizes that the war is here, that any hope of an off-ramp is gone. What did you make of this one? Yeah.
That was more beautiful, more lyrical, and more abstract than the other one.
Okay.
And and I saw Thucydides, and I thought of the comparisons today of like Thucydides and the U.S. and China's relationship. So I thought
The Thucydides trap. It's back. Yes. Right. Okay. Good. No. So the two poems are doing very different things. First and foremost, this one feels formal in a different way, whereas Refugee Blues is working with a kind of musicality, is surprisingly or unexpectedly playful given its subject matter. This feels more somber, perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah, I felt like I was listening to an older person who's probably seen it before, and they're commenting on what they see in the world around them before it all goes to hell.
Yeah. Right. Good. What does Auden see in the world around him?
He talks about the guys who are commuting, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah. Where do you see our commuters?
Third to last paragraph.
Good.
I've been true to my wife. I will be true to the wife. I will concentrate more on my work.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that just sort of rang as him highlighting the way that they live now, because everything's going to change soon.
For sure.
In the other paras.
Right. Look at the top of that same page, at the first full stanza that's the top there. Faces along the bar cling to their average day. The lights must never go out. The music must always play. All the conventions conspire to make this fort assume the furniture of home, lest we should see where we are, lost in a haunted wood, children afraid of the night, who have never been happy or good.
It's also interesting that he did have exposure to the Spanish Civil War, which is a brutal war with a lot of killing on both sides. So he is experienced in this maybe more than some of the.
One of the other kind of curious aspects of a civil war in particular is that life doesn't stop. That while the battle is going on, people are trying desperately to go about doing their thing. If you're not particularly involved, if the war is not immediately in your space, the people try to keep living.
I wonder how long after September, when he actually wrote this, and whether he had heard our president say what the U.S. was going to do. And the reason I think that so clearly is because of that line, into this neutral air. And I wonder if the president had already proclaimed America's neutrality in the war, and this is a sort of a criticism of that.
It's interesting. So I don't know exactly kind of when he wrote it, like relative, the beyond after September 1st, surely.
Actually, he wrote this just a couple of days afterwards.
Yeah.
But actually, it was published in October, like October 1st or 10th. So it was probably 1 month after this happened. So he published this. So I don't know if it's that time frame, but he did it very quick.
So maybe
it's amazing
it wasn't.
composition speed.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I found September 11, 1939, especially in contrast with Refugee Blues. The Refugee Blues was an accessible poem for me.
Mm-hmm.
And September was, I found it dense.
Mm-hmm.
However, since it was written in a way that intrigued me, I wanted to try to understand what kind of deep themes he wanted to say in such a, I guess that he was such a person with high verbal intelligence, so he liked to say things easily understood, and also as in blues, and also in very obscure ways, as in September. And I found that it was a trip, because each stanza led me, but with the help of dictionaries and encyclopedias, to many different wonderful things regarding the effects of psychoanalysis, interpretations on how we view things in life and how history, well, on and on, the original sin, but it was somehow not a light form, I don't think, and I think that it can be easily used in ways contradictory to itself because of the richness of it.
For sure. Okay, cool. So I think there's a lot to unpack there. I'd like to start with your observation that this poem feels dense and elusive in ways, particularly contrasting it with Refugee Blues. That one Auden has a reader in mind who can access, knows who Thucydides is, right, or what he's referring to in these, in each stanza, but the language itself too can be challenging. Earlier we mentioned the last two lines of the first stanza: the unmentionable odor of death offends the September night. What does that mean? Yeah, or what's going on in that line? Those lines. Okay, we'll mention something else and then we'll come back. Go ahead.
I noticed something interesting that each strand talks about like a topic somehow. Like you mentioned that Feast Along the Path, and that strand talks about how life just continues. He mentions the neutrality of the United States, like the political stance that the United States has in that moment. He also talks about, like, he refers back to in second page, on the top, imperialism facing the international wrong. That can be a critique to how basically the national community at the time let Hitler get away with like all the wrongdoings, and ultimately, like with the annexation of Austria, that could be the international wrong he's talking about in that point. After that, he also talks about like how the lack of authority and like steps, like what's going to happen from now on. There's going to be darkness. He mentions darkness at some point. He mentions also we must love one another or die. Probably he's talking about unity at that point. So all of this like a prediction from his point of view of what's happening on, and at the same time I think he is a critique to what's happening in the era.
Fantastic. I think that's a fabulous way to start to take apart a poem by looking sort of each stanza as in this one in particular as having a unique thought, a controlling idea, topic, of its focus. Maybe we could talk a bit about the international wrong you mentioned, if you'd rather go there. Let's look at that. Let's look at the last stanza on the first page that then continues on to the top of the second page. Would you mind reading that stanza? The whole thing into this neutral air. Just that little break.
Into this neutral air where blind skyscrapers use their full height to proclaim the strength of collective man. Each language ported vain, competitive excuse. But who can live for long in a euphoric dream? Out of the mirror they stared, imperialism face, and the international wrong.
Thank you very much. Perfect.
So, you want to go like part by part, or you just want to go?
Where do you want to go?
The international wrong?
Let's do it.
Because, like, prior to the invasion of Poland, basically the UK and France allowed the annexation of oh my God, I forgot this. Yeah, they allowed it basically, and there was like this big commotion at international level that they were basically violating the Versailles Treaty at the time, and allowing this was like they didn't want confrontation, the UK and France, because they really had a war. Let's remember just a couple of years ago, World War I. So that's why basically they allowed Germany to get away with this. It was not the smartest move. They basically gave legitimacy to Hitler at the international stage, and they also allowed him to just ramp up his forces and continue the expansion. So basically, like, out the mirror they stare. Like, basically the war just stood still in the first annexation, absolutely did nothing. The only country that actually stood against that was Mexico. They made a statement. It was the only country. That's why Austria and Mexico had like good relationships, because of that happened back in the day. Just to throw a fun fact.
Cool.
But yeah, out of the mirror they stared. The international community just stood there, then did nothing. Only Mexico protested.
Mm-hmm.
The UK, France, who were the powers at the time, allowed it to happen, and that's basically the international wrong.
Why the mirror then? Why the This is this is so good. This is so good. I love this moment.
Yeah, I mean,
Why?
also he's criticizing all sides in some way. The strength of collective man could be the Soviet Union. There was a Soviet-Hitler non-aggression pact during this time. So the Soviets also allowed Hitler to go into Poland. He's saying, each language pours its vain competitive excuse. Everybody's saying they're in the right, but everybody's invading, scheming, making plans to take over land, etc.
Interesting.
I took it more as a New York City centric thing. That
getting to
New York
that.
City's blind skyscrapers, which are proclaiming, the strength of all humanity. New York City was the center of business and commerce, and it's this booming place. Granted, okay, the Depression, this crash happened about 10 years previously, but it's recovering, and yet when New York is forced to look at itself in the mirror, when America is forced to look at itself in the mirror, it just sees.
What do they see? Which suggests a complicity, right? Or that's gone in, right? This sort of who could, how can we be in this euphoric dream? Where I'm in this euphoric dream and I look in the mirror and what's staring back at me? It's imperialism's face and the international wrong, because we're implicated. Auden seems to think that we're implicated in it. Since you're keen to take us to New York skyscrapers, I don't want to leave 1939 behind, but I never planned. I do want to look at. I know where was Ren. I do want to look at a take on this poem that's doing the exact kind of work that you're describing, bringing us into New York. So there's this eye chart of a handout that's coming around. It's an article from the Times Literary Supplement from October 5th, 2001. And what I'd like you to read is just this right column on the page that says a letter from New York. This right column, and then it flips over onto the back, and it's the top half. There was a moment in the weeks after September 11th where September 1st, 1939 seemed to be everywhere. And this article is about this poem we just read and offers a different reading on it, and kind of will take us back to 2001. So take 2 or 3, well, we can take 4 minutes. That now in 2001 it was suddenly everywhere, or interesting that it had survived into.
Well, yeah, I mean that, and just that, he came to hate the.
Mm-hmm.
It says the rhetorical quality of self-congratulation of the closing stanzas. I feel like that's you're kind of I don't know. It's kind of like you're kind of wrapped up in that. It's like you're wrapped up in that I guess response,
mm-hmm.
the trauma response, and that almost I guess Duger feeling, but that they're describing in the end of that article. But then I'm trying to connect it to the poem. I'm not sure that I have a thought fully fleshed out. It's just that's what stood out to me the most.
No, that's interesting. On the one hand, I think we should be deeply sympathetic to poor W.H. Auden, whose poem is now being circulated in ways in which he doesn't want. But he's a poet, right? These poems take on. I don't mean to just completely disregard his wishes for the poem, but the poems can take on different meanings, can take on a life of their own. And that can be important and worth thinking about, even if it's not always precisely what the poet may have wanted. So I think it's important to recognize that it might be used in different ways, while at the same time, I think acknowledging that life and commentary and criticism and context can matter in other important ways too.
How old was Auden in 39 versus 01?
Auden died in 73.
Yeah.
So in 1939 he was 32.
Did I miss it? Did they give a date on when the biographer executor said he didn't want to see it printed again? It was after LBJ in '64?
In 1972, yes. So after the Daisy Girl commercial, have you seen? If you do a YouTube search for Johnson Daisy Girl campaign ad, it's famous. You may have seen it in your politics class. It's a very little girl going 1, 2, 3, pulling out, counting daisy petals as she pulls them off, and then her voice is replaced by a countdown over a loudspeaker, and there's a close-up that goes into her eye, and you see the nuclear blast go off, and it's sort of vote for President Johnson, or the risks are too. That's what the ad is saying. But as the article says, the campaign ad misquotes probably the most famous line in this poem: "We must love one another, or die." The bottom of page 2 on the.
I do think the author in this has a point though, because the beginning of the poem, Auden's talking about himself. I sit in one of the dives on 52nd Street, uncertain and afraid. Even though he's talking, even though it gets to these huge kind of global themes, it starts out with him and how he's feeling on this particular day.
Cool. This September night.
Yeah,
Right,
and it kind of loops back to him at the end.
Yeah.
There's other kind of eyes that, like the commuters, etc. All I have is a voice to undo the folded line. So I think the point is legitimate that in a huge crisis, we're also thinking about our own responses to that, right?
For sure.
Not all of us are like Auden, so we can't express it so well. But the other thing is, this is a very formal poem, very dense, but the language you used in the beginning is incredibly plain language, right? Sit one
Dives, right? Yeah.
And afraid. You're immediately like taken to that place instantly.
Right. Uncertain and afraid. Why might this poem? I mean, if you remember it circulating, if you remember what it was, autumn of 2001 felt like. How does this, or might this, have resonated with New Yorkers in September 2001? I mean, the unmentionable odor of death offends the September night. Right.
I mean, just that line right there is like almost too much on the nose.
Right. Blind skyscrapers, their full height, to proclaim the strength of collective man.
And then even the last line, like negation and despair show an affirming flame. I mean, like, it kind of plays into what the end of the article was talking about, critiquing the people that are just coming in, just trying to be a part of something, but it's not really doing anything, but like they're trying to kind of be a part of something and be a part of the despair at the same time of making themselves feel better.
Yeah, good. I quibble a little bit with Swift's reading here, right? The sort of at the he seems to take some umbrage with "yet dotted everywhere ironic points of light." This is the very last stanza on the last page. Flash out wherever the just exchange their messages. May I, composed like them of arrows and dust, beleaguered by the same negation and despair, show an affirming flame. I don't know that the speaker of Auden's poem is necessarily saying that he himself is just, but maybe recognizes that there are others out there and aspires to be. I'm maybe less sour about it than Swift is.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty human impulse to want to, when a terrible thing happens, you want to like give blood or
Sure.
not necessarily a bad impulse, even if it's kind of in vain or maybe beside the point.
It's the Steve Buscemi riding the fire truck, right? This is the sort of right. Well, I mean, it was the kind of at the end of the day, it's that's what else could I possibly do? What do we make then of Swift's again the second to last paragraph here that troubled me a little bit? maybe we could muse or puzzle over that. On a sunny Sunday morning, 5 days after the World Trade Center fell down, I went with 2 friends to a warehouse in Chelsea to volunteer in the great rescue effort. We were supposed to be loading trucks with piles of things that people had donated, torches, latex gloves, dog food. But the trucks didn't show up, so we spent most of the day sitting in the sun. Steve Forbes' huge green yacht was moored opposite the warehouse. Balthazar, a noisy faux French brasserie in Soho, where on a normal evening you have to queue to get a table, had donated beef stew to feed the volunteers. Yeah.
Instead of an opportunity to help, just stuck in the sort of trenches of the extraordinary wealth that is in no way, shape, or form assisting the dead or their grieving families.
Yeah, cool. So is there? So in that, so what's his attitude toward that? Is he? Oh, if I like anger better than where I was, where my instinct was going with it. I think that's charitable. Good. Right. Yes. Ah, I like this. That's better. Yeah.
There were supplies and donations of clothing and stuff coming in a month after it happened.
Yeah.
Right.
But again, is it bad for people in Texas to donate clothes to New York? Maybe it's a futile gesture, but it's a gesture, right? So
Just a pain in the ass.
Yeah, that's
Wow.
not.
yes, I agree, but maybe people should be more thoughtful about what they do.
But the instinct, the impulse, the desire you find pure and noble, whether or not it causes more trouble pragmatically.
Pure noble necessarily, but I understand where it's coming from. People
Okay.
they want to contribute. They don't know how.
Yeah.
And they weren't the firefighters and the cops who were rushing into the buildings to save people, but
That's what I remember. I remember that feeling. It's not pure and noble. It just comes up like you see it. It's burning, and you think, "What could I do?" And keep thinking it. Oh, I know. I'll give blood. You can't. Oh, I know. I've been close. No, there's nobody to wear the clothes. There is nothing to do. I remember that feeling. But just that's what you want to run and help someone.
Remember.
Best thing to do was get a free ticket to the World Series and sit next to a fireman.
Right.
And the Yankees won.
Right. It was the time all the doctors and nurses raced to the hospitals and then no one came. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, he basically, Daniel Swift talks about this, like, we all want a part of tragedy. Like, everybody wants to chip in somehow.
Yeah.
And he also mentioned, like, simple human need for connection is balance of a ton of self-glorification. Like, people need that. People are attracted for that. So that's why, like, according to what Swift says, the first strands of September 1st is so relatable to the common New Yorker at the time. And going, like, in the loop too, something else I want to, like, mention is, like, let's remember that September 1st was the beginning of World War II, basically. And this was also the beginning of the U.S. interventions in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Right.
So it's like history repeats itself. People want that. People just keep seeing connections. And it's kind of like that's how the same thing that obviously it wasn't another world war, but it's a war that impacted, like, American lives hugely at a big point. So it's like everything goes back in the loop.
Right, and Afghan lives, and Iraqi lives, and lives all around the world. I'm curious, and I know you've had your head up for a second. It does making this comparison, right? Because a poem written before anybody knew what the extent of World War II would be by 1945. Does it feel almost fatalistic? Like this has happened. The war has no war has started yet, unless we're going to count, obviously, the attack as part of it. But you know where I'm driving. Does it feel fatalistic? Is the sense of thinking about September 1st, 1939, in September 2001, filled with an ominous foreboding, an awareness that war is coming? We don't know what it's going to be yet or what it's going to look like yet, but it's coming. And there's a powerlessness there to stop it. Maybe, I don't know. I'm
because he's like, the Enlightenment is gone. We're going to have to do all this all over again. Mismanagement and grief. We're going to suffer all of it again.
Yeah.
He knows, right? He knows what's coming.
Right.
Maybe not the exact outlines of it, but you notice.
How awful.
Yeah, this slow, dishonest decade is coming to an end, and something even worse is coming.
Right. Yeah. Fantastic.
To me, it begins to take the form of some of the stanzas in Auden's September that I don't know, maybe the word would be paradox, that things that seem unrelated happen in life. He may be sitting in a bar listening to blues music, and he's safe and sound there in a place that feels like home to him because of the furnitures and the entertainment. And at the same time, on another part of the world, people have suffered horrendous tragedies, and so that the sense of that he points out that suffering that can happen when you are walking down the street, that you cannot avoid it. Almost maybe like the notion of the painting of Icarus falling, and then there is some people walking up the hill to do their daily business, and but in the meantime, that other said demigod is dying, drowning, and we don't notice. Sometimes it's we live our own world, so that kind of sense of. So the guy may have been well, I don't know, maybe sipping champagne on his yacht, and then suddenly the towers blew off. So that's, I don't know, that sense of it's kind of strangeness of the whole of reality.
Right. Were you? Your comment took us to in the second paragraph. Swift evokes Auden's Musée des Beaux-Arts, which is where he sees that painting, the Bruegel's landscape with the fall of Icarus, and he talks about there's a ship going by in the background, and he describes this little ship. They must have seen something extraordinary, a man fall from the sky, right? But the little ship had somewhere to get, and so sails on. In that way, right? The tragedy, this great sort of tragedy. In the foreground, there's a man like plowing the field or working the field or something like that. But that would have been a great poem to include in the big stack, too. Cool. Last question with Swift before I want to turn back, or I want to end maybe with this. You were talking about the tragedy here. We all want a part of the tragedy. These are the last lines of his letter from New York, right? It won't rebuild any towers or fix any bodies, but the state of fixation and curiosity in which the city is left may be all that remains after the dust that covers the downtown shop fronts and the terrible pile of rubble are swept away. We all want a part. We all want a part of the tragedy. What do we do with it?
You can also see that trend in other things.
Yeah.
Let's say, just to put an example, it's not a big tragedy. When the Notre Dame church burned down, there was this big commotion about it.
Yeah.
And also when other things happened, like the explosion in Beirut, people would the fact they just post the flag on their profile picture, they put a message in social media, they want to feel part of that.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing that's happened in Ukraine. Everybody was putting flags out, support. Same thing with either Israel or Palestine. You're always going to see people trying to get related to those tragedies, one way or the other. And that doesn't mean they're the right or wrong side of history, but they're always going to try to relate to that.
For me, one thing about 9/11 that was very different is New Yorkers and Americans were shocked that it happened here.
Yeah.
Wars happen overseas, right?
Right.
Wars, not since the Civil War, which nobody alive can remember, have there been an attack on the U.S. mainland like that. And I think, particularly for a long time in Europe, or any New Yorkers, it made it different than something that was overseas and maybe a little bit abstract.
say there was not dishonest decade? That's what really jumps out at me when I heard you say that, because the World Trade Center had been unsuccessfully bombed in '93. So I think that a lot of what went on from '90 to 2001 was a lot of dishonest existence in the United States. Yeah.
People like in denial.
Yeah, like academics, not even the intelligence community, was well aware that Bin Laden had declared war against the United States for a long
Didn't
time.
connect the dots.
Well, nobody listened to those people because it wasn't politically convenient.
There's one thing that where it says we all want a part of the tragedy. For me, it almost feels like it means that each and every one of us needs to share and support our fellow Americans who suffered this horrible thing. That we need to be there, and that's what it is.
It's an interesting way of processing a collective tragedy, and whether or not certainly other events had happened, whether terrorist attacks on U.S. soil and to U.S. citizens abroad. The idea, the scope and scale, perhaps made it feel like a national event, and we seemed ill-equipped to process it in that moment. And then it manifests itself in a way of everybody out there desperate to find their personal connection to the tragedy, because it's the only way we could process how we felt so close to something. How many people were going to a meeting and or their cousin was going to a meeting, or they knew somebody who just finished their internship there. All of a sudden the near miss became sort of longer and longer.
I think for a lot of New Yorkers, they were connected somehow.
Yeah, right. Sure. I'm thinking sort of the national scope. How do you explain kind of collective or national mourning for an event that happened in downtown?
We all want a part of this tragedy. That language irritates me because, and it brings me all the way back to the first thing we talked about was no place for us, my dear, and that inclusiveness of we. Like, if a bomb goes off in the Ukraine, or somebody gets killed in Gaza, or the World Trade Center gets attacked, it's like we are part of it. It reminds us that we're part of it. It's not that we're some tragedy, it's just we are part of it, and then the question comes up, what is my part? But we all want sense very much. Like we're just like, we're these kind of greedy spectators.
Ooh, right. No, I think that's fair. John Donne writes, in Meditation 17, that each man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind. Right. The sort of, therefore do not send to know from whom the bell tolls.
Things like this, like unite us. That's what Bush did in that time. I don't know. It was like a week later when he gave his speech in the Remainings. Like, they will hear about us. We're gonna go after them, and everybody cheering clap. Like, he actually used the momentum of everything that was happening to use that as a political advantage. It was right or wrong. That's not maybe we for this discuss, but it's an example of how also things like this can be used for a major purpose with all what's happening.
Right. Let's stick with the World Trade Center for a minute, but go back a few years. We discussed very briefly this events in 1993. And it's a poem David Lehman, Columbia graduate and living poet, wrote about that event. What happened in 1993 in the World Trade Center?
The bombing of the garage.
Yeah.
I think killed 6 people. Badly kind of damaged the structure.
What was it supposed to do?
It was supposed to take one of the towers down,
Right.
or if not both.
Right, knock one into the other or something. So whatever. It was supposed to be catastrophic, and it ended up being deadly, but on a much smaller scale. Let's just, to save time, let's just read this together, and see what we can do with it. I never liked the World Trade Center. When it went up, I talked it down, as did many other New Yorkers. The Twin Towers were ugly monoliths that lacked the details, the ornament, the character of the Empire State Building, and especially the Chrysler Building, everyone's favorite, with its scallop top, so noble. The World Trade Center was an example of what was wrong with American architecture, and it stayed that way for 25 years until that Friday afternoon in February, when the bomb went off and the buildings became a great symbol of America, like the Statue of Liberty at the end of Hitchcock's Saboteur. My whole attitude toward the World Trade Center changed overnight. I began to like the way it comes into view when you reach 6th Avenue from any side street, the way the tops of the towers dissolve into white skies in the east when you cross the Hudson into the city across the George Washington Bridge. Yeah, now I'm just curious what's outside of this. Okay. Lehman's, how does this contrast help us understand what's going on later on September 11th with the way we process the destruction of the World Trade Center with what, might be called an awful, but near miss, right? What do you think?
The contrast of victory and defeat.
Oh, okay.
Basically. And the World Trade Center that it went down in 1993, that's basically considered a victory. They failed their attempt to attack the United States. Obviously, there were people there, but if you contrast that with what happened in 2001, that's like a huge difference. It's a whole total defeat. And let's remember also, in 93, the U.S. was seen as like the supreme superpower.
Right.
The Soviet Union just dissolved in 91. It was basically U.S. supremacy. So basically of that, like the World Trade Center not going down, just reinforces that idea of the U.S. being so strong, so hegemonic. So that's one of the, like, this change of how you see the World Trade Center before and after. Like the U.S. survived an attack on the World Trade Center.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's going to be this monolith, and it represents basically the strength of U.S. imperialism.
Why does it need an attack, though? It changes. Yeah, you're onto it.
The symbolic importance of something changes based on what happens.
Okay.
That's what the poem is about. Not as these ugly buildings.
Ugly.
Not as nice as the Chrysler building. But hey, they tried to bring them down. I kind of like them now. They're kind of a symbol of our resilience or whatever.
Right.
But I think, things that may mean one thing at one time are seen very differently. Post-historical events or whatever.
Right.
It's what I took.
Yeah.
I agree. And I think that just people generally, like, just take Donald Trump. Not a big fan of him, regardless. He wants to make America great again. Donald Trump's implying that at one point America was great. Well, this author is sort of after the World Trade Center. After, how do I say it? He has this sort of positive outlook of the past later on. The way some people today have a positive outlook, and it's sort of creating things that were not,
nostalgia.
that didn't actually, when things were actually bad, in some ways a half a century ago. In any case, I'm having trouble enunciating it, but that's he's anyway.
No, you're.
That's the best I'm gonna say.
But no, you're on. I think you're on it because it's about creating. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. I'll show it. Yeah. Oh, there. Yeah. Chime in.
I like this poem. In its brevity, to me, it encapsulated experiences that I could relate to. Because he was right about the architecture. It was wrong. When I had to go to work around that area, I would prefer to go through their basement so I could see all the shopping mall stores there and maybe buy a soap or something. Because outside it just felt dreary.
Right.
Their supposed beautiful plaza was pure concrete and bronze sculptures, no notion of nature. So at the same time, now I wish they were still there.
Yeah.
The bar on the top floor was nice.
Right.
That's true.
Except the rum coke was $12.
See,
That's,
bargain. No. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet the other
20
thing
years
that I found uncanny
Yeah.
is that the first line, I thought I had to reread again. I don't know if the part of the title is 1993 or if you put it so that it's for our own sake of understanding where he was at the time. Because I thought that how does he know that it's in the past tense that they were there? Later on he corrects the tense of it, but I thought.
No, but he says the Friday afternoon in February, so he's not referring to
Yes, but I never liked the World Trade Center, so that I thought, well, he knows in 1993 that they are no longer there.
Oh.
That's how
Oh, it does.
because it spoke completely in that past tense of it.
Right. No, that's interesting. I mean, it's fascinating too because it's so hard for us to read this with a 1993 mind, right? Because we like to read without knowing what happens in 2001, without all of the symbolism and the mythology that we've kind of attached to it.
I thought it was quite tribal and simple. I can make fun of my little brother all you want, but if you start making fun of my little brother,
Okay.
it's a different thing.
Yeah. Good. Let's build on that. The buildings, and I'm interested in this because I think that the tribalism, right, or whatever kind of, I don't know if patriotism is the right sentiment here. I'm looking about the middle of the poem, when the bomb went off and the buildings became a great symbol of America, like the Statue of Liberty at the end of Hitchcock's Saboteur. The bomb went off and the buildings became a great symbol. Yeah.
Putting that positive, feeling on it, which he didn't have when it was standing.
Okay.
It's like Trump looking back and saying it was great when it wasn't.
So he would have never liked it without this bomb. There's something about this act of violence that turns it, because it's an attack on your little brother, that causes a response of protection or affinity, an amplified kind of affinity. Is it sincere? Was it always there? Did he always have this this feeling, you think? He's sincere now? Okay. Yeah, he believes this. True. But I like the way that it comes into view when you reach 6th Avenue.
If the question is whether he thinks that the towers are a great symbol, is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
I think that for some people it was, because as I recall Philip Petit's biography, he was so enchanted when he first saw the photographs of the Twin Towers when he was living in France, that his whole life changed, and his mission was to come here
between the two.
to come to the United States and live in New York, so he could cross the two towers on his little thing.
No, my palms are sweating already.
So I think that he found a beauty in those two towers there that I could not see at that moment. So I think that my view of the Twin Towers was not universal, that there were people. And in fact, Mayor Koch advised the policeman that captured him. He said, don't beat him up because we need him in good shape for the photographs, because he's going to make more people like the Twin Towers. We need that.
I didn't know that about the arrest.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. But yeah.
I think your point is a really good one, because I feel like, look, we can talk trash about these buildings. We're New Yorkers. But somebody comes from the outside and tries to take them down. No way. We're not going to allow that.
Even though we all do really love the Chrysler Building best of all. Sorry. No, yeah.
I guess to just kind of add to that, one line that did stand out to me was my whole attitude toward the World Trade Center changed overnight. Because I think that's very physical. Like, yes, he's started to see the World Trade Center differently, but also the change in American foreign policy and how we view the Middle East or terrorism. I think that changed a lot of people's idea overnight and clearly got enhanced after 2001. But I think that wasn't necessarily on the back of Americans' minds at the time was a terrorist attack or a bombing, and then that I think started to change America's view on what terrorism can be, I guess. So I think that was just a interesting way of saying like how it changed overnight in his ideals towards them.
That's interesting too, and I'm curious if your comment has me thinking, to what extent does the symbol, or the Twin Towers as a symbol of resilience post 1993, make them somehow a different, a more attractive, a particular target in 2001, right? If this doesn't happen, does September, you see kind of, I mean, this is a weird and maybe unproductive counterfactual, but I think that your sense of this kind of accretion of symbolic power, right, feels like it works kind of both ways. What we might stand up a symbol and say, aha, now with the Statue of Liberty, now we have the Twin Towers, and we've now said they're both equally national symbols, then is driving policy responses or things like that that could be even more extreme, as they were, in consequence to the next attack.
Plus, I think the whole poem goes back to this powerful patriotic image of crossing the river and George Washington. That's how the poem ends, like the original great brave symbol of America. George Washington crossing Delaware, well, we have the Hudson, but it's going in the other direction, east over the Hudson to the George Washington Bridge.
Right, which among sort of New York landmarks, the George Washington Bridge should be universally loathed by by all who've crossed it and paid for the privilege, right? You're right. That's interesting. I think I'm making a joke. Your point, I think, is very serious, because there's something about evoking in this last line George Washington and this particular moment, right, of American steadfastness in war, right? That does not necessarily immediately come in the wake of 1993, but we will see comes in the wake of 2001. I have so many more poems that I've printed out and carted over here that we have 5 minutes to attend to all of them, which will be hopeless. I don't know where. We can have them for the train home. Absolutely. Thank you. That's a good idea. That's. I will leave you with Marianne Moore's poem that I can't decide if it's pro-wars or not, and Anthony Hecht's terrifying Out-Herods Herod. Pray you avoid it. Okay, maybe we could just sum up briefly before we break. I would remind you, if you haven't yet, please do sign in and the sign-in sheet. Today, what I was really kind of, I think, interested in drawing out some connections between the starts of World War II and the start of the wars that came that followed in the wake of the September 11th attacks here in New York. In particular, I think I'm interested in the foreboding that comes out, the feeling that the one may inspire in the other. But in both instances, I'm drawn to the similarities that are sometimes eerie and sometimes comforting between the way that people respond to the start of war, to knowing that war is going to start, even if you're not quite sure what it's going to look like. Both experiences have been played, are an important part of the way that this city has negotiated a variety of wars. When we meet next time, we're going to do two things. We'll talk about the Civil War. I want to reach back to Walt Whitman, and we'll talk about Herman Melville and his thoughts on the draft riots in the middle of the American Civil War. And then I want to look forward to think a little bit about the future of war writing and New York City's place in what that might look like. But thank you all. Please grab extra sandwiches for the ride home, for your roommate, for your neighbor on the subway, anything you'd like. Thank you again for your time, attention, and your hard work.